Eli, are we ready? Oh, there we go, live on YouTube. Excellent. It's so good to see you all. Welcome to another monthly Lunch and Learn with Nehemiah. We're really glad to have you here for your lunch hour. Hopefully you have something good to eat. My name is Dr. Karen Reese. I'm the Vice President of Research and Education at Nehemiah, and it's my pleasure to host this discussion with you all today. So to get started, if we're ready, I will go ahead and start to introduce our panelists that are here with us today. We are in luck to have a couple of members from the UW, and of course, as always, our staff, Aaron Hicks, and also Johnny Pfeiffer, who's on camera with me today. So Mike, would you be able to introduce yourself and just kind of tell us what is your relationship to the criminal justice system?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Karen, for inviting me to join today. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin here in Madison. My relationship to the justice system, the criminal legal system, is that of a researcher. So for about the last 12 years or so, I've been conducting psychological research within state prison facilities. And it's been the last couple of years that I've really made it a concerted effort to develop relationships with people in the community who have that lived experience, organizations that work with those individuals like yourselves, to really try to understand how our research can be directed in ways that will have maximum impact.
Great, thanks. And next we have Talia Cohen. Talia, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship with the criminal justice system or criminal legal system? Trying to change my terminology there.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I'm really excited to be here, especially because I've been an audience member for multiple Lunch and Learns. So it's an honor to be presenting today. I'm a PhD student in psychology at UW, and I work with Mike in his lab. My research broadly is on increasing access to mental health care for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. And in the last few years, we've been working with Nehemiah, Aaron, and Karen both on this call to incorporate people with lived experience into that process to make sure that we're creating interventions that work for the people who will be engaging in them.
Great, thank you. And next I have Johnny Pfeiffer here on screen sitting next to me. Johnny, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Johnny Pfeiffer. I'm an affected individual of the criminal system, and I own a wellness company to help individuals who've been formerly incarcerated.
Thanks, Johnny. And Aaron, everyone probably knows you already, but if you wouldn't mind also introducing yourself.
My name is Aaron Hicks. I am the Reentry coordinator at Nehemiah, and I'm also affected by this system as well.
Great, thanks. So to get started today, just for our audience members, in case you haven't been with us before, there's a Q&A tab down at the bottom of your Zoom control. So if you have any questions at any time during this discussion, please do list your questions there. We do also have a chat feature open, so if there's anything you want to just comment on to your colleagues, you can definitely use that as well. So to get started, Talia, could you give us a little bit of an overview of the context? So what does this look like, what we're talking about today?
Yes, so I'm going to give just a short 5-minute presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, is it being seen? Okay. So I'll be presenting statistics and its implications, but I'm also really excited that we have Johnny and Aaron here to put more of a face and personal experience to what I'll be presenting on. Okay. 56% of incarcerated people have a mental health problem. So by mental health problem, I'm speaking generally about a wide range of symptoms that could include depression, anxiety, trauma-related symptoms, But importantly, this number includes people who are struggling with mental health but may not meet criteria for a mental health disorder. There are 10 times more individuals with mental illness incarcerated than in state psychiatric hospitals. So some researchers attribute this to something called deinstitutionalization, which saw the closing of state-run psychiatric hospitals starting in the 1950s. Conditions were really bad in those hospitals, so there was a push to incorporate mentally ill individuals into the community. But unfortunately, unlike planned, we didn't see like the creation of adequate community mental health resources to make up for the lack of residential treatment. So now correctional facilities are the leading providers of mental health care. Around 15 to 20% of incarcerated people experience psychosis. Psychosis refers to a range of symptoms where someone loses contact with reality. So that might include delusion, where thoughts are not connected to reality, or hallucinations, where a person senses something that isn't in their environment. And people who experience psychosis may have a diagnosis like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And depending on the data, this number is at least 5 to 10 times higher than the rate of the general population. The majority of incarcerated people have experienced a major traumatic event, for example, assault, abuse, among other things, prior to incarceration. And around 20% of these individuals will meet criteria for PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an illness that includes symptoms like flashbacks and memories, hypervigilance, which is when you're highly on guard, and avoidance of trauma-related stimuli. I will also note that mental health diagnoses are higher in women, but these statistics reflect all incarcerated people. Substance use is also widespread among incarcerated individuals, with 85% of incarcerated people having an active substance use disorder, or they're currently incarcerated for a crime that involved drugs or drug use. And the impact of untreated mental illness it's huge. People with mental illness spend more time in solitary confinement, which has been demonstrated to exacerbate mental health symptoms. And also, when mental illness is left untreated, it can lead to suicide, which is the leading cause of death in jails at about 30% of deaths and 8% of deaths in prison. What I'm showing you here is called the sequential intercept model, and it details how individuals with mental illness come into contact with and move through the criminal legal system. So what you could see here is there's many opportunities for intervention and diversion from prison before someone is actually incarcerated around here. But incarceration is often the first time individuals ever receive mental health care. In terms of mental health services in prison, typically a mental health professional will conduct an intake or a mental health screening when someone is first incarcerated, and this can determine who will receive more services. And while some individuals do receive treatment, we also know that 3 out of 5 individuals with mental illness don't receive care while they're incarcerated. It varies very broadly by institution, but prisons typically offer individual and group therapy to some. Prison sentences are longer than jail sentences, so treatment is more likely in prison, but different prisons offer different services, so I won't go into specific programming here. There's also been specialized mental health units within prisons, and those are being implemented across the country. So these units are only for people with mental illness, and they have a higher ratio of trained mental health staff. These units have been shown to reduce violence and infractions in prison. So aside from the fact that incarcerated people have a legal right to adequate medical and mental health care, treatment while incarcerated is vital in order to reduce what's called the revolving door phenomenon, where individuals with mental illness cycle between incarceration and homelessness. All right, to close out this brief presentation, I want to bring us back to this sequential intercept model with some hope. So programs such as mental health courts and crisis intervention teams in these earlier stages can intervene and divert people before prison, and they're becoming more widespread. And there's also been an increased focus on the later stages to help those reentering the community after incarceration get access to mental health care to avoid a discontinuation of care. So there's still a lot of work is needed, but programs are becoming more widespread, and we can maybe talk a little bit more about that today.
Excellent. Thank you, Talia. That was very informative. I was really shocked at that 30% of suicide being 30% of deaths in jails. That is terrifying. And certainly something that we need to address. So for today, we're going to focus a little bit on how do we learn more about mental illness in prisons, and how do we learn about how we should treat this and how we should approach these sorts of things. So next, I'd like to ask you, Mike, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing and kind of some of the things that are coming out of it?
Sure. So one of the challenges that we're trying to address, or issues we're trying to address in our work, is the experience and incidence of trauma and PTSD among people who are incarcerated. Like Talia was saying, citing the statistics, virtually everybody who's incarcerated has experienced some extremely distressing, if not life-threatening, sorts of traumas, often starting at a young age, childhood, adolescence, and often repetitive, throughout their lives, leading up to the time and probably including the time they're incarcerated. So it's a big issue. I think it's widely recognized as something that contributes to a lot of problems that lead to involvement with the law. So with experience of trauma and post-traumatic stress, you get increases in substance use, you get increases in reckless and sometimes aggressive behavior. So in our view, treating trauma could really be addressing a root cause, in a sense, of a lot of individual sorts of behaviors or issues that are problematic. So how do you approach something like that? We're looking for a therapy that would be acceptable, obviously, to the people who would be participating, as clients would be receiving the treatment, but also one that'll work in the correctional setting, so in the prison setting. So a couple of things to consider, with treatment, like, so the one model that is widely used in corrections is like the group sort of talk therapy, psychotherapy model. So we're looking for a treatment that would fit that. Staffing is a huge issue in prison. So I actually just checked on the DOC's website. They have a staff vacancy dashboard, and I think there's a 22% vacancy rate among psychological services unit. So that's 1 out of every 5 positions they have funding for is currently unfilled. A lot of the top priorities for those positions is very often crisis intervention, time-sensitive, urgent things. And so carving out that time to, do the therapy, to do the work, to lead these groups is not always possible, or at least not done as optimally as one might hope. And so we're trying to, figure out ways to provide sort of evidence-based, care in that setting. And so that's what we have, currently underway. One thing that I'd love to hear, Johnny and Aaron talk about is the dynamic or the relationship between, people who are incarcerated and, the mental health care providers in that setting. And a couple of things that go along with that. Talia was citing statistics saying there's, was it 56% of people incarcerated have a mental health problem? Well, those data are really only as good as the methods used to collect them. And I wonder, are there reasons that, certain symptoms might be unreported, or that, that you wouldn't say, yeah, I have this issue that I'd like help with, or, a particular kind of treatment, like you maybe wouldn't engage in a way that you might, out in the community. So I think, these are the issues we really have to think about when we're talking about providing care in that setting.
Absolutely. Mike, can you explain what you mean by evidence-based care?
Evidence-based means that there has been research, you know, on the particular intervention or program to show that it's effective. Um, the way that these data typically, or this evidence typically builds, is that a treatment could be applied in what you might consider more like optimal settings as far as research goes. So that would often mean that it's done, you know, at like a research university medical center with very stringent criteria for who gets invited to participate. But what you lose in that, or I guess what that first stage does not allow you to make conclusions about, is like, how is this going to work out in the community? And so I would say evidence-based, the therapy that we're using, cognitive processing therapy for PTSD, has been widely used and tested in the VA system. So we know it works very well there, but it hasn't been tested yet in the prison setting. So there's an evidence base from other settings. We're trying to determine, will it work in the prison setting, and what sort of adaptations do we need to make so that it is effective.
Right, thanks. Aaron, I would love to hear from you, either a response to what Mike and Talia have shared, or if you want to share a little bit about your experience with either your own or people that you've interacted with.
Can I? Yes, all of that. I do have a question.
Of course.
So my question is strictly this. I wanted to know if, in fact, we have research that supports that this is effective within the criminal justice system, or injustice, however you want to see that, but and we don't implement it into the system. And this might be for you, Dr. Reese, but I'm just curious, does that mean it's a different agenda? And the only reason I'm asking that is because it was something that Talia put up about, I don't know, this paranoia. And what I've noticed is that it's, you know, after incarceration, the ability to trust in any capacity from any system becomes almost impossible, because you see things based on the experience. You see things in a light that you never saw before. So from that point on, and so that's what made me that just resonated with me immediately. Even in relationships, like the ability to just have a, you know, intimate relationship, that in itself, there's a, I don't know, it's like a fear, almost like you know, I can only go so far with this, and then I gotta run, like I can't. So uh, I don't know if that's a question, a statement, or just a lot. Y'all can unpack it.
Maybe all of that. No, I think it's a really good question about, you know, what is the agenda or the intention for our institutions where we incarcerate people. And, you know, I intentionally didn't use the word correctional facility because, you know, this would be the kind of thing where if we were in a rehabilitative setting, knowing that, you know, the incredibly large numbers of people who are struggling with not only mental illness, but also substance use disorders, which I characterize as mental health issue as well. I don't think they should be separate. It seems logical that we would focus on treatment so that when people are getting out, they don't come back. And yeah, definitely noted about, I think that gets kind of at the question, or, you know, some of the things that Mike was asking about, your comment about being able to trust people in relationships. If you don't have those relationships while you're inside, or those relationships are toxic, then what does that mean for when you get out? So there's a, you know, it seems a lot like people who are incarcerated, we look at that as kind of off the record, and then people come back into society. And we really would be well served from making a very clear connection throughout that line. But yeah, those are definitely good points to raise.
Yeah, and just the last thought, you know, something that really, based on something that Mike was sharing about just the lack of staffing inside um, the prison system. Um, when we send people to prison, there's some rhetoric about it's about protecting the community. Uh, and we know, like, man, about at least 85 to 90% of people go to prison or get back out. With that being said, like, I don't understand, like, why do we continue to keep using that, you know, that type of rhetoric saying that it's about protecting the community, and in no way, shape, or form is it about when we don't even have enough, there's not even enough staff to be able to handle all the people that's in there. You know what I mean? So it's like it becomes confusing because everything for the community, they hear protecting the public, but that's not what it's about at all. And so actually a lot of times people go in and come out worse. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Johnny, I want to ask you, you've talked before about your own experiences with mental health and mental illness, and I'm curious how, looking back, well, if you could tell us a little bit about that, but then also kind of looking back, because you found out about mental health and taking care of yourself in that way after you got out, really. And so if you kind of look back, is there anything that you can spot, in your past when you were incarcerated, where you could think, like, if I had had support during that time, things might have been different?
Yeah. Looking back, I was incarcerated before I went in mentally. Growing up, as a man, we was taught not to talk about our feelings and our emotions and what was going on, with us. And I think as a child, I was great at sports. I stood out in sports and all that type of stuff. And so when things started to go on in my life that I didn't understand, I didn't know how to reach out to nobody. And I think that started my incarceration because when things was going on and I didn't understand what was going on in my life, I was afraid to reach out to somebody because I was afraid that somebody would think I was weak or I wasn't a man or I would be judged. And so I held those things inside and it caused me to put on a mask. And so I wore this mask for a long period of time and things started to eat on me at the inside. And when I got around other men, I would hear things. I would hear conversations and I would pick up conversations. And so I would portray things that I would hear and I was act as if I knew what was going on in life. And so when I got around people, I would say, yeah, well, this is what's happening. And I didn't have a clue what was going on in life, but I remember what I heard. And when I got alone by myself, I would, in my head, I didn't really understand what was going on. So I would be around other guys. They would, hey man, here, drink this, smoke that. And then we start to self-medicate. And when you start to self-medicate and things got worse and next thing you know, you're in criminal activity and things just snowballed and you forget who you are. And that went on for a long period of time. Even though I was good at boxing, I was good at basketball, I wasn't good at life anymore. I didn't know who I was anymore. Then when I got to prison, I knew one thing that I had to do. I had to be strong because I know prison was the survival of the fittest. And I was always was going to be in the top of echelon when it came to fitness. So that's how I survived. I survived being fit. I survived staying in the gym. I didn't talk about my feelings. I didn't talk about my emotions. And they didn't care. I would talk to guys and about their cases and guys couldn't read and that was shocking. And And I was sitting in the day room one day watching TV, and the guy just jumped over the balcony and just killed himself, busted head wide open, killed himself right there in front of everybody. And I thought he was just crazy. Nobody talked to me about mental health stuff. So I didn't know what was going on because I didn't know what was going on with myself. And I kept seeing guys walking around like they was mummies, like they was possessed, like they didn't know what was going on. And I found out that they was getting on medication because they had a lot of time and they didn't know how to do the time. So they was asking doctors if they could get on meds. And I was like, why they on meds? And I didn't understand that they was dealing with mental health stuff because I didn't know what mental health was at the time. But when I got out, and I met some different people, and I met my wife, and I met Jerome Dillard, and my wife started noticing stuff, and she noticed that I worked hard, and she asked me had I ever tried medication, and I said no, and she asked me would I give it a try, but I had developed a relationship with her that I kind of trusted her, and I trusted her enough to try medication. And I got on some medication, and what medication did, it slowed the wheels down in my head enough where I can kind of get in control of some, just some of the thoughts. And then I was able to talk to her about some stuff. And she said, you should talk to somebody about it. I said, what? She said, you should talk to a therapist, a psychiatrist. And because I trusted her, I trusted them. And because I trusted her and I trusted them, I was able to work through some stuff. And I said, oh shit, this shit works. Then I started to find solutions. Then I started to find answers. And then my life started to turn around because I was able to talk about some things. And I was able to get some solutions and I was able to get some answers. And that's where things started to turn around for me. I was able to trust some people and let some people in to be able to talk about some things. And that's what it takes. And that's why I do what I do in the community, man. When guys come out of prisons, I want them to know that I have a safe place where they can come and talk about their issues and get support. That's why I do what I do.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And I hear a lot, what you're saying. A lot of it is really about that relationship and being able to trust someone. That was critical in your being able to access things that could help you.
Yeah. A lot of us, we don't trust people. We don't trust people with our feelings. We don't trust people with our conversations. And we damn sure don't trust white folks. That's one thing, they done put us in these situations. We've been lied to, we've been lied on, we've been misrepresented. And to be able to trust those in high positions, we don't have that trust. Yeah. And it's hard to give up trust in those positions to white people. It's very hard, man. And my wife has brought me to a place where I'm comfortable with building relationships and filling out people and knowing that people have my best interests at heart. I've come a long ways with being able to give up that trust and give up those relationships, man. I've come a long way.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on that, Johnny?
Yeah.
So can you imagine, thinking like that point that you made is so important about it was only because you had developed this relationship of trust with your wife that you were able to kind of take that step, seek treatment and see improvement. Thinking back on where you were at and where a lot of people are at when they are first incarcerated, can you imagine a situation or like what kind of a person or setting where you could start to have that relationship of trust where maybe you could in that environment start to engage in care?
When you're incarcerated, could you imagine a situation or how could you get that same feeling? So that if people are incarcerated, they could access services while they're inside before they get out.
Hey, Mike, that's hard, man. That's a hard pill there, man. It's a feeling. It's a feeling you have to have. When you come in those settings, you have to come in those settings, man, and you have to open up. You know, because those settings are like you're around a bunch of piranhas in those settings. Because if guys look at you and they think you weak, they will prey on you. So you have to be careful in those environments. You have to be really careful in those environments, and you have to create a safe environment. What you have to do as a guy who's trying to make way in those environments, you have to create a safe environment. You, the facilitator, you have to make sure that environment is safe. And if you can make sure that that environment is safe, you can make it happen. But you have to make sure that environment is safe first.
So the person running the treatment.
The person that running the treatment have to make sure that that's a safe environment. And if you can make sure that environment is safe, you can go a long way with it.
I would just add on to what he just, I mean, you laid it out perfectly. The part that I would add to it is because of the environment, everything is suspect. Not just the individuals you in there with, but also because you see, you seeing things. I mean, you read articles, you see, relationships happen. You hear about, people get hurt, die, all types of stuff. So it's like so much being thrown at you, and it's in its rawest form. So it's not like, this is sketched out or no, this is just like it's happening. You don't know when or why or none of the above. And so it keeps you on high alert at all times. Even when you laughing, you still on high alert. You go to the bathroom, you're on high alert. Like anything, I mean, to live like that constantly, day in, day out, and you don't know where it's going to come from or who it's going to come from. Because it could come from one of your peers, it could come from the officer, it could come anywhere, And so to live like that day in, day out, and then return to the community, your whole everything about who you are, you're not even whoever you were when you went in there, that's gone. That died, I promise you. That's over with. So that part of whoever you were then has been lost. That's gone. Cause now it's about how do I live? How do I survive through what I know, I'm watching people lose their life. You don't have anybody to come talk to you about any of those things. You know what they do? As soon as someone passes away, they put somebody else in that room, period. Nobody's getting talked to. No one's getting communicated with. He just talked about someone just jumping off, killing themselves. Well, nobody comes and talks to you about any of those things. So now we putting these people, 85 to 90% of people to go to prison to come back into the community. We have to question if we continue to use the rhetoric about this is about keeping our community safe, then how is this keeping it safe? It has to be asked.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
And then one more thing, Mike, the education level, what really shocked me was so many guys are in there, so they don't have the tools to facilitate what they need. They don't even know how to ask for what they need. And that blew me away, that there was guys in there who couldn't read. There was guys in there who couldn't understand what their letters were saying. They don't even know how to facilitate to say, I need help. I don't understand this. I don't understand that. And that was shocking. That is shocking. When you don't know how to say, I need help, not because you don't know how to say, I don't need help, but because you don't have the tools to say, I don't need help. That's sad, man.
Yeah. I want to go back to you, Talia. Oh, go ahead. I think you're going to comment on that.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Johnny and Aaron were both saying, this idea of the environment and not having trust within the environment. And when we think about PTSD or trauma, we're not even thinking about having the traumatic impact of being incarcerated on top of what was experienced before. And it is extremely difficult to work through trauma when you are currently being traumatized. And so we have a sort of this hard reality is that people aren't receiving treatment while they're incarcerated, but also it's important to acknowledge that it's really hard to engage in treatment while you're incarcerated, and to just, just as Johnny and Aaron have put really well, to even consider to let your guard down a little bit, which is required when you're engaging in mental health treatment. So there's this tension, and yeah, I'd be interested to hear what people think are potential solutions.
Definitely. I want to ask you first, Talia, we had a couple of questions in the Q&A here. One, just you said 95% of people have experienced major trauma, but there's only a 20% diagnosis of PTSD. Where do those numbers come from? And can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. And so with all of these numbers, there are different sources and different types of data. So I try to, kind of combine from multiple sources, because if you're measuring in a jail, if you're measuring in a state prison, a federal prison, you'll get different numbers. But that translation from experiencing trauma to PTSD is that often people will experience trauma, but they won't exhibit some of those symptoms that I talked about, like re-experiencing memories or flashbacks or avoidance of things related to the trauma. And so we need those symptoms to officially diagnose someone with PTSD. But trauma still has an impact, right, on the body, on the mind, even if you're not reaching these predetermined thresholds of PTSD.
Yeah, so two things in what you said. First, there are certain questions that need to be asked to make an official diagnosis. So there's a question about, how often is diagnosis actually happening in these settings? And my understanding is it's fairly rare unless someone is in crisis. And then the other thing that you said relative to Aaron and Johnny's comments is they would have to disclose to you that they're having these flashbacks and having the symptoms, which if there's not that trusting environment, people might not be likely to disclose that information, even if someone did ask. Aaron commented on people being on high alert all the time, which is a symptom of PTSD, and it also sounds like an adaptive behavior, something that people develop as survival technique while incarcerated too. So what do you think?
That's a really good point, that some of these symptoms of mental illness are adaptive, right? When you're hypervigilant or you're highly on guard, that's important when you're in a prison environment. And so thinking about mental illness also in that framework of how, maybe these PTSD symptoms are serving the person and for their survival and getting through this experience that, many of us can't imagine.
Right. For you, either you, Mike, or you, Talia, there's another question about the numbers that were shared, and is there how are we looking at any changes that might be happening from when people are incarcerated, or what does that really look like for any diagnosis that's happening to your knowledge? What's really happening in our institutions as far as diagnosis? And then are we looking at the change from when people are inside to when they're out?
Go ahead, Talia.
I was going to say you can take that if you want, Mike, but I can just say about the change, I think we don't have that data, and that I think is extremely important, measuring across time. And I think often we have just like a one time point data and not necessarily the development process from being incarcerated. Mike, is that in line with what you would say?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any studies that have done that, but I agree that would be a very important thing to understand.
Yeah, excellent question, Wendy, and something that we should keep pushing for. And it kind of relates to Larry's comment about, we all hear stories of people who are working in our institutions that are pushing for change that don't always last a long time in the institution, because the system, it is what it is, and it doesn't always allow for changes in process, even if there is the staffing level available. I don't know that we can all guess as to the motivation, but we don't have anyone here to answer that specifically. But Larry said the evidence base is only as valid as the system collecting it, which is absolutely true. And so, Mike, can you comment a little bit on that? Because you are actively collecting this evidence and doing this research. So what have you learned over the years about that point, that, making sure that the data that you collect is as valid as possible? What needs to happen there?
Yeah, well, I've learned that if you don't intentionally include stakeholders in everything from the design of the study, through its execution and interpretation, and then how you communicate results,
By stakeholders, you mean people who have been incarcerated?
People have been incarcerated, but not just people who have been incarcerated, right? And so this gets to a question that Aaron asked too earlier, about what does that mean when the research results aren't being incorporated into the system, or they're not changing anything. Well, I'm, I guess, not particularly proud to say I did that work for a long time, honestly, like really sort of within the cocoon of the academic setting. And I thought, well, I'll just publish this work, and then it'll be read and it'll be taken up. And because I was seeing that wasn't happening, that really motivated me to engage more with people who are impacted by the system. And one stakeholder, right, is the Department of Corrections, and different staff members within there. And I think they have to also be involved in designing research such that the results will be in a form that they could take and use to inform policy. And so, at least in our research program, we do sort of actively pursue those conversations, to try to understand, like, what changes would you need to see, what data would we need to show you such that you would take this and make a change in policy.
Hey, I have something to say. You guys don't realize that people in prison who are having mental health issues, and Aaron could attest to this, when you having mental health issues, they come to your room and they drag you out, they mace you, they throw you down on the floor, they put their knee on you, they handle you real rough, and you are just having a mental health issue. It's not like you hurt anyone. It's not like you did something to a guard. You could be in your room talking to yourself or having just a bad day. They come, they handle you rough. They handle you like you just committed a class A felony, and they will slam you down. They will mace you. People with mental health, when I start realizing what was really going on, and I say they did him just that, like that, just because he was having a mental health breakdown. I said, oh my God. And when I got out, I vowed, I said, I have to do something. I have to say something when I get out. I have to fight for people like that, because that shit is not right. And that's why I do what I do, man. Because I seen what they do, with people with mental health issues. You don't get no break. You are treated just like everybody else in the institution, and it's disrespectful and it's sad.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Aaron and Johnny. There's a couple of questions here. One is about wondering if people notice that if you do disclose mental health struggles or that you're suicidal, is there reluctance to do that because you'd be worried about getting put into observation or even isolation? And then another question from Eric here, sounds like he's a provider. If you have any suggestions about like is there anything that they could do to the physical environment of where treatment is being offered? So he says he tries to keep his meeting space quiet and, you know, decorate it with nice pictures and good music. Is there anything that could be done to that point? So two things: reluctance to share because you'll end up in a compromising situation, and then what would the physical space look like?
I'm gonna take the reluctance to open up. But definitely, if you bring up anything about suicide ideation or anything, you're definitely going to observation. Without a doubt, you're going to observation. No heads up, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They're definitely taking you to observation. You can count on that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. What about you, Aaron? Any thoughts about those two questions?
Well, I mean, one thing you learn about, I mean, you learn this period. Anything that you say can and will be used against you. Period. Ain't no, you can say it if you want to, but the consequences is fatal. I promise you. So I just, you're not really gonna get the outcome you're looking for because people scared to death. Because the truth of the matter is anything you say can and will be used against you. So with that understanding, the likelihood of you ever getting to the root of anything is slim to none, which again, we use the rhetoric about protecting the community. And the question has to be asked, how is this beneficial in any way, shape, or form to the community? It actually makes it that much more unsafe because we're not dealing with any of the issues at all in any way, shape, or form. It's an artificial atmosphere where people are going to say whatever they need to say so that they can get back home, but in no way, shape, or form will you ever really tap into what needs to be tapped into or change that narrative, because every person in there clearly knows anything you say can and will be used against you.
Yeah, thanks. We're coming up on the hour here, so I want to shift us just a little bit into talking about what do people think can or should be done to improve this, to make sure people are getting the help that they need and that they're in a space where they're able to access that. Mike, Lynn was asking about if you're using cognitive processing therapy, and she asked, what are you finding? And I actually would love to connect the two of you. I think you could have a great conversation. But what I'd like you to answer now is, based on that, what do you need? What needs to be changed in the prison environment?
One, I think, opportunity that I'm really interested to explore with some of the people on this call, because I've seen the work that they do in the community and how effective it is the use of peers, right? People with lived experience. How do we utilize that to get over, I mean, staffing issues for one, and access, but then this issue of trust. Like, so what is the potential role for using peers either within the institution or people from outside that already navigated these sorts of issues? So that's one potential solution I think is very worthy of attention.
Yeah, thanks. How about you, Talia? What would you suggest?
Something that I'm interested in is how we can develop more self-paced treatment. And so maybe if there is some reluctance to share with a therapist that works with the Department of Corrections, is there interest in reading about and engaging in mental health material on your own and working through that, you know, in a place where you don't necessarily need to share, since I'm hearing from, you know, both Johnny and Aaron that feels almost impossible to do sometimes. Yeah, I'm so curious to talk with, you know, people more about that going forward, but that's one avenue that I've been thinking about.
Thanks.
You know, another thing I'll suggest too, like on Johnny's point about just even the literacy, right? The ability to talk about these issues. So in the field of academic psychiatry, there's a term they use, social determinants of mental health. And that, and education is one of those things. So even if it's not directly engaging in mental health care per se, what can we do for people impacted by the system to sort of build up these other issues, education, housing, employment, family relationships, the quality of neighborhoods. I mean, all that contributes and helps to, really support an individual's, mental health and their ability to engage with mental health care.
Thanks. Aaron, you've been working with some folks, Mike included, on doing mindfulness in prisons. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's being able to create things that individuals can use inside to navigate through being incarcerated is huge. And so we, myself and Carmen and Rudy Bankston, we all were. This was during the COVID epidemic. I mean, we're still having it, but it was just much higher. But wasn't able to go into the prisons, and so we were creating videos and sending those videos into the prisons where they would be able to access it. And actually, we were sending them to Deb Mayhart at the time before she retired. So she was dispersing it to the individuals to be able to utilize mindfulness inside of the prisons, which
And
I believe.
can you say
Pardon me?
Can you say what Deb's role was?
Oh, she was the chaplain. She was the chaplain at Fox Lake Correctional, and then also the chaplain at the Resource Center. Um, but yeah, so that was some of the work, and that was huge. Just because I swear to you, um, true story. Couldn't even make this one up. I'm at Woodman's grocery store, and just shopping. A dude walked up to me. He said, "I know you," and he was like, "Don't say anything." He told me my name, and he was like, "Those videos." But I say that to say that when Mike started to talk about the concept of utilizing that lived experience, that's huge. That's also huge to build back trust. Um, because if we try it any other way, I promise you, it's not going to happen. So, um, yeah, but that was huge, and so we know that's being dispersed throughout the prisons because my Woodman's experience. So.
That's amazing. Johnny, can you comment a little bit? I know you are into mindfulness as well, and how might that help people
Wow. Yeah. So
in 2 minutes?
mindfulness is it's a way to slow down the mind, to slow down that monkey mind, to get you in, to really get you to stop jumping on every thought that comes across your mind. To be able to jump on a winning thought now and then, that you don't have to jump on every thought that run across your mind. I get guys now calling me. Their wife is he calling me now? Man, when are you coming back? We need the group. It's amazing at the what my group is providing in the community. What mindfulness and yoga is doing in the community. What it has done to my life. How it has slowed the wheels down in my life. How it has allowed me to get in control of my thoughts. And I said, if it can do this for me, imagine what it can do for others. And it's been amazing. I watched the video of how they're implementing mindfulness in schools around the country, and I swear by mindfulness. It's been a staple in my life, and I want to continue to implement it as long as I'm alive. It's something that I live by.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny.
Yeah.
So just sort of to summarize what we've heard, I mean, I'd say it's getting closer to where the majority of the public knows the statistics about the prevalence of mental illness in prison. And I want to emphasize that we're not only talking about very severe cases that you might see on TV, or psychosis like Talia was talking about. We're also talking about depression and anxiety, something that, the majority of the public suffers from, and being able to access resources. So we've known about it for a long time, but we haven't done a lot to change it. So the people on today have talked about, making sure that we're doing the right kind of research to inform the work that's going on in a setting that's appropriate. So not just taking things from other settings, but doing the work in prisons. We've also heard that because trust and relationships are so important, and the prison environment makes it really difficult for people to connect on those levels. So what kind of innovative ways can we think about, like education that Talia mentioned, or the mindfulness that Aaron and Johnny mentioned? How might we expand those kinds of things to help people, at least in the place where they're at, without that exposure? And then to everyone watching today, I know there are a lot of people who are already involved within the system, working in various roles. But to those folks and to people in the general public, I think it's so important for us, now that we know what the problems are, is making sure we take that to our legislators and our elected officials, because one of the biggest places this conversation is hung up is when we talk about budgeting. And it doesn't always necessarily mean, because corrections is the highest budget line item. We spend billions of dollars on corrections. And so how might we reallocate some of that? How might, we move some things around so that there is appropriate funding, so that we can recruit people to fill those 20% vacant positions that Mike mentioned. And so it's going to take creativity, and, taking apart what exists currently to make something that's going to address the issues that we know that exist. So I want to thank you, Mike, Talia, Aaron, and Johnny. Thank you all so much for being a part of this today. Really appreciate your expertise and your insight. And thanks to everyone who joined today. Hope you learned some stuff, and we'll love to see you next month. Our next one will be October 13th at noon. And in this case, we'll be talking about voter rights, since we're coming up on voting season. Eli just dropped the link in the chat for that. You can register right now if you want to. And you can always catch these on our YouTube channel. All of these sessions are recorded, so you can catch it on our YouTube channel. Ooh, and new podcast episode talking about electronic monitoring. So make sure, where can they find that, Eli?
You can find that pretty much anywhere, any of the podcast services, Apple, Google, anything.
Awesome. Any other announcements in there?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you soon.